Good evening and welcome to Fractured Atlas's webinar about individual donors. Tonight we're going to talk about how to engage and keep your donor, as well as how to put together an individual appeal letter, and we'll give a brief introduction to crowdfunding. But first, it's nice to meet you. Before we get much further, I'd like to introduce myself even in this digital setting. My name is Teresa Hubbard, and I'm a program specialist for fiscal sponsorship at Fractured Atlas. I've worked at Fractured Atlas for about 6 years now, and I've worked with artists through our fiscal sponsorship program for that entire time. You'll also see here the rest of our fiscal sponsorship team, including Nathan, Aisha, Courtney, Sabrina, Lauren, and Kat. You will probably speak with all of these people at some point or another during your time as a fiscally sponsored project with Fractured Atlas. Before we get into the content of tonight's presentation, I wanted to let you know that we are recording it. And so don't worry if it feels like I'm going through the question or through the slides really quickly. I will send you a copy of the recording after I'm able to render it and put it onto YouTube. So it'll probably be tomorrow or Thursday when I send it to you. So sit back, relax, take notes if you can, but otherwise we'll be moving through the slides pretty quickly. If you have any questions, feel free to send them to me through the questions box as we go through the presentation. I will leave some time at the end to answer them. So you can also feel free to just hold on to your questions until the very end and type them into the questions box then. I'll probably leave about 15 minutes or so in order to answer those questions. And with that, let's get started. Here is a breakdown of the funds raised through Fractured Atlas's fiscal sponsorship program over time. This is a pretty, as you can see, more than 50% of the funding we received for the purposes of our fiscally sponsored projects came from individual donors, while less than 40% came from foundations and then still less than 10% from other sources. This is a pretty prevalent trend throughout the United States, and the funding, it's how a lot of funding breaks down. Oh, I'll go back actually for a second. But it is important to note that this is contributed revenue, and this will probably make up still less than half, if not just around half, of your organization or your project's budget. The other half will come through earned income, which is, sales, merchandise or ticket sales, event sales. It could also include fees for service, including when people pay you to perform some sort of service for them, or other earned types of income where you are receiving money but giving something in exchange. So contributed revenue tends to be the type of revenue where somebody is giving you money and they don't expect anything in exchange for that money. And this is typically how that part of your budget breaks down. This trend is also prevalent in major cultural institutions in the United States, and it shows us that we should rely on individuals to fund the majority of our budgets. You might be thinking, though, but what about grants? Aren't they usually in larger sums, and aren't they more reliable because they come from institutions? While grants take up about a third of our income for our fiscally sponsored projects, you can't really rely on them because they're competitive and may not come through year after year. Statistically, grants are the most competitive type of support that exists, and they have been decreasing each year. So really, the best way to create a sustainable funding model is to build a donor base made up of many individuals rather than a few grants that may or may not come through the following year. So how do we find donors? Or how do we even talk to donors once we've approached somebody? How are we going to talk to them? So we're going to get into right now cultivating individual donors. I know this sounds crazy, but the most important thing to remember when soliciting a donation is that it's not about begging for money. It's about conveying your vision and what impact you anticipate will result from your programs. Your ultimate goal in this is not to raise money. I'm going to say that again. Your ultimate goal in fundraising is not to raise money, but to create something great. You'll want to tell a compelling story that so your donors know what you're doing and why you're doing it. And it's kind of a good thing to keep in mind that you'll be expanding your movement. What you're doing is a movement. In other words, you're inviting your donors to become part of your work and to help you make an impact. We need to understand that fundraising is about creating the opportunities for others to be part of the solution that you've developed to a problem you've identified. So you're going to want to ask yourself a series of questions in order to figure out what to say to your potential donors. For instance, why are you doing this? What is the compelling need or problem that your project addresses? Who is affected by this problem or impacted by this solution, the solution that you've come up with? In other words, who is your audience or who will you serve with this work? How is your project going to present an innovative solution or solve the problem at hand? What do you bring to the solution and what are your program strategies? There's a reason that you're the one who's doing this and a reason that you've come up with a specific strategy to solve the problem that you've identified. So, what is unique about you and your skills and your team, even that you bring to this solution that you've identified? So now that you have the questions to ask yourself, it's time to come up with answers to those questions. You'll want to offer a unique solution and highlight your ability to carry out that solution. You can include the qualities of yourself and your staff as well as the resources you have available. You'll also want to point out the benefit to your donors. It's important to appeal to your donors' humanity by letting them know that the good that they're doing by contributing and otherwise how the work will benefit them. These questions will help you to organize your thoughts before approaching potential donors. Once you've asked yourself these questions and answered them for yourself, you'll need to use this information to begin engaging potential donors. It'll help you create your communication plan. So, one place to start is to identify your goals and make sure that you're communicating them. Develop an image of what success looks like to you and determine how you will measure progress. Keep your objective front and center so your audience knows what you're trying to do and how they can help. Your goals should drive your campaign or your fundraising initiative. You also want to evaluate your communication and voice. Keep track of what type of communication has results and adopt that style. But remember that different people might respond differently to different voices and different forms of communication. So you might need to adapt different styles depending on who you're approaching. But most importantly, remember to keep your communication personal. You're again trying to appeal to your donors' humanity and to their personal side. So make sure that your communication with them remains personal. You also want to use interactive tools. The first time you think of something new, what is the first thing you do to find out more information about it? Probably in most cases, you'll do a Google search for that item, that company, or that person, whoever it is that you're looking up or whatever it is you're looking up. You want to make sure that your project is what I like to call Googleable. Your project should take up at least one search result on that first page of results in order to ensure more traffic. And this doesn't mean that you need to manipulate Google's searchability, but your project should be unique enough to identify itself separately from other projects that might be doing the same thing or might have similar names. You should also keep an up-to-date website that is easy to navigate so your potential donors and audience members can easily find the information they're looking for. They should not need to scroll or click more than once to donate. And for instance, if you have a donation tab on your website, make sure it's front and center. Or same thing if you have a donation button, make sure it's really obvious on your website. When they click on this tab or this button, all of the information they need to donate should be there with a link to your Fractured Atlas donation page. I might Fractured Atlas also has another program called Artfully, which I'm going to mention a couple of times throughout this presentation. Um, and because it can be really helpful in developing a communication strategy for your donors and keeping track of that. So if you're using Artfully, you do have the option to embed a donation widget right on your website, but it doesn't actually work with every single website provider, so you wouldn't want to talk to the Artfully team about that. But that would allow for your donors to stay right on your website instead of being taken away to Fractured Atlas's website. That said, a lot of donors don't have a problem clicking to Fractured Atlas's website and making a donation right there. But this is a really great solution for the too many clicks problem, having your button right in front and center so that your donors are taken exactly to where they need to go to make that donation. The thing about your website, though, is that you want to make it extra clear that Fractured Atlas will be charging the donor's credit cards so that they're not surprised when they are taken away from the Fractured Atlas or from your website and taken to the Fractured Atlas website. So when you Google your project, one hit will be your fiscal sponsorship online profile on Fractured Atlas's website. This is the profile that I was talking about. And you can see without even scrolling down, there is that great big donate now button. That is your obvious call to action so that your donors can easily find out how to make the donation. This profile should be updated regularly to reflect your current fundraising efforts and any current projects you're working on. And what about social media? Use it. Studies have shown that 96% of millennials have joined at least one social network and that the fastest growing demographic in social media is people over 50. Coincidentally, one of the largest philanthropic demographics is also people over 50. So you want to make sure that you're using that communication style if it works for people that you know, if they fall into that demographic. So, but considering the number of people using social media and the ease with which people can share information using the various platforms, it can be one of the most important tools you use in your fundraising. Social media can especially be helpful when running a crowdfunding campaign, as it's the best way to really leverage your network to make your work more accessible or make your campaign more accessible to more people. If you have a social media presence, your followers can help out by spreading the word about your work. They can share that they made a donation, or even if they can't make a donation, they can still share your campaign so that other people can access it. You also want to guide your donors through the process. I made a big point to say that your donor should see a great big call to action and know exactly what to do. But also, there might be some instruction involved. You want to make sure that you are being very clear about what you want from your donors and how they can give that to you. So you should give them explicit instructions for how to donate. Click this button here. You'll be taken to the Fractured Atlas website where you can make a donation, or where you can click donate now, and you'll be walked through the process of making a donation. Or if you are asking for check donations, your check should be written to Fractured Atlas with my project name in the memo line. Please mail your check to this address so that we can take care of it for you, or take care of the next steps. Make sure your instructions are really easy to understand, and that you clearly define each step your donors need to take to make the donation you've requested. You don't want to make the request and then have them fall off because they don't know what to do next. So make sure you're making it very obvious to them. You'll also want, of course, again, to clarify for your donors that they'll contribute on Fractured Atlas's website, and that their credit card statement and tax receipt will show Fractured Atlas as the donation recipient. Oh, I'm seeing one person saying that they're not getting any visuals or video. Is anybody else experiencing the same thing? I want to make sure it's not on my end. It looks like other people are seeing it. It's possible that you don't have your videos set up or any sort of visual setup, but like I mentioned at the beginning, I'll be happy to send the slides to you tomorrow so that or on Thursday, so that you can access it at a later date. Unfortunately, I'm not exactly sure what's going on right now, but if you can't figure it out, rest assured I'll send you the slides later. So the other thing you want to make sure is that your messaging is very clear. Make sure to be specific about what you're asking for. Anyone can give you support, quote unquote support, just by patting you on the back and saying, I support you. But you want to be specific about requesting a donation so that your donors are aware of your intentions. It's also important to make it clear that your goal is not to raise funds. I know I said this at the beginning. Ultimately, you're trying to make art that will serve a greater audience. You're trying to solve a problem. Raising funds is just a means to an end that will help you achieve your goals. It's also important to reward supporters for your success. Rewards should be based on the amount of your donation. It makes sense, for example, to make your larger donors feel especially important as a thank you for their contribution. So you might want to invite them to an open rehearsal or to have dinner with an artist, something high touch and very personal. It doesn't make sense to offer this type of personal reward at a lower donation point, unless it's your grandmother, because you'll exhaust your resources too quickly. Remember, keep it simple. Your rewards should make sense with your mission and they shouldn't break your budget. For example, if you are a ballet company, it may not make sense for you to have a pizza party for your donors unless that pizza party allows for them to also access the work that they've helped to make happen. Other examples of rewards can be thank you notes, invitations to rehearsals or events. You could give them a shout out on your website or social media, or you could even consider just setting up giving levels where you are saying at such and such a level you're going to be listed as a silver sponsor, and at this other level you're going to be listed as a gold sponsor. You don't necessarily need to give anything in exchange for a donation, especially since that could affect the tax deductibility of the contribution. Fractured Atlas does make it easy, though, for you to offer rewards to your donors by giving you the option to set up giving levels. Your donors have the option to select a giving level when they donate, which you can track in your donation history. So you also want to, now that we've cultivated our donors, we've talked to them, we've developed, maybe explored a communication strategy. Let's say we're at the point where people have donated and you want to ask them to donate again. You want to make sure that you're keeping them involved in the work that you do. And I'm going to give you a few strategies for how you can help them do that. Write a personalized thank you to each donor immediately upon receiving the gift. I know it seems kind of obvious, but it's also easy to get caught up in our busy lives and not send the thank you note or a personalized thank you note that really shows how grateful you are for the gift. It'll really add that personal touch that shows your donors how important they are to you. If you decide to send a thank you by, text message or on social media or something like that, that's fine, especially since that can help you with the expediency factor. But you should also really think about how you can personally thank your donors for the gift, whether it's sending an email that is sent directly to that person, it's not an e-blast, or even consider writing a handwritten thank you note. Donors respond really well to pen on paper. So especially if we're talking about donors who qualify in the major gift category, you might consider handwriting them a thank you note. You'll also want to use their preferred method of correspondence. I mentioned before that not everybody communicates the same way and not everybody responds well to the same types of communications. So you really need to evaluate how your different donors respond to different types of communication. If your donor does not respond to emails, don't email them. Likewise, if they don't return your phone calls, try emailing them. I mentioned Artfully before, but Artfully can help you with this as well because it can help you keep track of how and when you've contacted your donors. If you look at their donor record on Artfully and see that they didn't donate after you emailed, but they did after you called, then maybe you should continue to call them for future contributions and to provide updates about your work. And for anyone who is unfamiliar with what Artfully is, it is web-based business software for artists that allows you to keep track of your patrons, sell tickets, take donations, and more. You can even note which methods of correspondence produce results so that you can consult that information the next time you go to contact a certain donor. Maybe you're not ready to use a formal tool like Artfully, and that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be tracking your communications with your donors. Consider doing it in a different type of tool or even an Excel document so that you can keep track of um, of that information. Artfully is great though because you can have more than one person accessing the Artfully account. So if there are several of you who are responsible for communicating, you can keep all that information in one place for everybody to access all together. You also want to keep your donors up to date on your activities. Invite them and make sure they know what their gift went toward. You always want to invite your donors to your events and so that they can have that one-on-one time with you. And remember that your donors are potentially a built-in audience for your work. So inviting them gets more butts and seats and it allows for them to connect with you on a personal level. It's also not a bad idea to survey your donors. Ask them what they think of the communications you send. I'd suggest starting, if you're going to do this, I'd suggest starting with your friends and family, asking both those who have donated and those who haven't what they think about your solicitation. What did they like? What didn't they like? What do they think you could have done differently? As you continue to expand your donor base, you should continue to survey your most faithful donors in order to continue refining the way you interact with them. You can keep your language fresh. You can keep your style of communication fresh. Make sure that you are really refining your messaging as you go. It's also not a bad idea to develop an advisory committee that can help you do all of these things. They can help you write thank you notes or make calls to donors. It's a good idea to have a group of people who can help that will allow for you to keep connected with your donors and thank them for their generosity in a timely manner. Um, this, fundraising is a full-time job at a lot of organizations, and you want to make sure that you have a support network because you're only one person. You can't necessarily be the most effective fundraiser and executive director and artistic director and art creator. That's a lot to ask of one person. So develop some sort of committee of people who can help you do some of these other things, some of the things that you feel comfortable delegating to others, but who also have a demonstrated belief in your mission, or uh, maybe who are already donors who can help you, who care about helping you in this capacity. It's also important to consider why people give. There are a lot of reasons people give, which may include that they care about the success of you and your work. They might care about the audience you're serving and want to help you bring your service to that audience. Perhaps they want to help in some way, but they can't give time, so they want to give money instead. Some might want status. It's kind of attractive to be a philanthropist in the United States, and while that might seem kind of selfish, it's also a pretty awesome status to have. Some just want the tax deduction. A lot of nonprofits will do a huge push at the end of the year because people are scrambling to find places to donate so that they can get their end of year tax deductions in place. Absolutely a reasonable reason for people to donate. They select causes that they care about and make their funds go toward that. So it's it's a good idea to sort of understand the psychology of why some people give in order to refine your communication strategy and maybe assess the people that you're approaching to see if they have different um, reasons for giving. So how do you get them to give? This, could probably be its own webinar, asking people for money and persuading them to give. But I'm going to summarize a few reasons or a few ways for you to get people to give. You'll want to have printed materials that are easy for donors to view, also an accessible website, all of which should be up to date. I always suggest to projects that they have business cards or postcards or a brochure or anything that they can keep in their pocket or in their pocketbook so that if you find yourself talking to somebody about your project, you immediately have something to give them so that they can find more information right away. If you don't have something to give them, you run the risk of them forgetting between the time that they saw you and the time that they get home to actually do some more research about your work. Giving them that collateral is means that they're going to find it when they get home, and that will remind them to do some additional research about your work. You should also consider creating opportunities for people to volunteer. Not everybody can give money, and you want to make sure that you are giving them some opportunity to give otherwise. So, volunteering is a really great way to do that. Maybe they can help you write your thank you notes, or maybe they can help you make calls to donors to make that ask. You can also consider turning no's into not yets by asking them for something else. Maybe you will ask for materials, some in-kind goods or services, maybe a space that you can meet or host an event. Any of these things are ways to persuade people to give even if they can't give money. You, of course, want to track your contacts. Anybody that you meet is a potential audience member or a potential donor. So you want to make sure that you are capturing people's information when you meet them, especially if you're talking about your project. And that way you can come back to that and continue the conversation with them at a later date. And then, of course, if they can't give dollars, another thing that you could do is maybe ask if they can bring friends to your events or tell someone else about your work. Maybe they can make an introduction for you or to somebody else that they think would be interested in giving to your work. So a lot of the time people can't give money, but giving them the option to make an introduction is a really good way to keep the relationship alive and of course expand your network. Stay positive. Always remember to stay positive. You should have the right attitude and believe as a leader that what you have to offer is of great value and that you're offering your donors an opportunity to be part of that value. Keep in mind that you're not asking for a handout. This is, I keep bringing in this up. It's going to be a theme. You're not asking for a handout, but offering to give them the opportunity to be part of something great and beneficial to a group of people. So don't forget to convey confidence about your project competence and capabilities. Talk about your successes, talk about why you're qualified to make this work happen, and stay positive while doing that because that'll instill confidence in your donor that what they're giving money to will actually make the intended impact. So, we're going to talk next about individual appeal letters. Individual appeal letters are probably the most traditional form of asking for money. And the reason we keep going back to them is because they work. And, of course, you want to evaluate your donor's communication style and whether or not individual appeal letters would work. But assuming you're going to write some sort of appeal, whether it be, or solicitation, whether it be by email or a formal letter or an e-blast, I'm going to share with you some tips for how to make a successful letter. First, you want to use simple, straightforward language. You want to use a lot of nouns and verbs and limit your use of adverbs and adjectives. Your donors will feel more engaged when they think about people and doing than they will if you talk about how you feel about the people and how you feel about what you're doing. So try not to use flowery language. Try to get right to the point. Format your letter so it's easy to read. You should break the letter into several paragraphs and use easy to read fonts. And that might seem obvious, but I have definitely read letters that are in teeny tiny red script, and it's really hard to read. You want to make sure that every single person to read it or can read it, and make sure that you're not limiting the number of people who can read it by the font that you're using. Also, keep it to 1 to 2 pages so that it does not take too much time for your donor to read. The longer your letter is, the more likely it is for your donors to stop reading it. You want to ask for money, not support. I mentioned this before. And don't bury your ask. It is the purpose of your letter, after all. And it's absolutely appropriate, especially in the United States, to put your ask into the first paragraph of your letter. It is possible that your potential donors will not read until the end of the letter. So if you put your ask right up front, they will at least get the message, even if they don't read the whole letter. You also want to give them a reason to spend the money now or to send you the money now. They need to know that you need funds now, not in 6 months. Of course, it would be helpful in 6 months, but there's a reason you're asking for that money now, and you want to make that clear to them. Let them know that you need X number of dollars by such and such a date in order to make this particular initiative successful. You also want to use I and you, but mostly you. Remember, you're going to emphasize how this will benefit your donor. Using the word you will help to emphasize that fact so that your donor's benefit from this is very clear. You also want to base your appeal on benefits and not needs. And this goes back to the whole not asking for a handout thing. You do not want to come off as needy in your letter. So make sure to speak less about your needs and the needs of the company and more about the benefits to not only your donors, but also to your intended audience. Definitely emphasize the impact and the benefit. You're ultimately doing this work for someone or for a group of people, so talk about the benefit to them. You should also, I'd suggest using some online resources to search for examples of amazing appeal letters. You'll probably find some bad ones in there too, but that's not a bad thing. You can learn a lot from looking at ineffective letters, as well as effective letters. So if you even just do a Google search that says um, um, annual appeal or solicitation letter or individual appeal letter, you'll probably find some pretty cool resources. And if you're looking for a place to just get started, on your My Fiscal Sponsorship page, there is a heading that says fundraising templates. And under that heading, there is a template, or at least a starting point, that is called individual appeal letters. You can download that, read through it, and it'll give you an idea for the types of things that you should be putting into your letter. And remember, if you are fiscally sponsored by Fractured Atlas, you'll need to have these letters approved before you send them along to your donors. And you can just email them to support@fracturedatlas.org and we will review them, usually within 1 to 2 business days. But we do ask for 5 business days to review them in case we have some edits that we need for you to make. There could be some back and forth about it. So how else can you make sure that you're getting the most out of your solicitations? Well, there are 3 major ways to maximize donations for your project. First, monthly gifts are important for any fundraising campaign because they allow your donors to contribute less at one time, which allows for them to give more over time. Let's look at a typical donor profile comparing monthly donors versus one-time donors. As you can see, even without the year-end contribution, the monthly donor will still give $65 more during the course of the year. Overall, monthly donors are 7 to 10 times more valuable over the long term than regular one-time donors. So think about how you can encourage your donors to give monthly. Fractured Atlas makes it easy for you to accept monthly contributions so that your donors can set up their monthly donations right on our website. Their credit cards will be charged automatically on the same date every month. The next way to maximize your ask and your donations is to ask for non-cash donations. Donations do not only need to be made in cash. You can often eliminate your budget items by asking for a non-cash, or sometimes known as in-kind, gift. This is especially important if your donor cannot offer funds but has equipment or other materials to contribute. Remember, only tangible items are considered tax deductible according to the IRS. And when I say tangible items, I mean things that you can hold, equipment, materials. But unfortunately, this means that donations of space and service are not considered tax deductible according to the IRS. Fractured Atlas can process donations of tangible items and offer your donors tax receipts for those donations. Your donor will have to complete a non-cash donation letter, which you can find on your My Fiscal Sponsorship page, and they'll need to assign a value to the item that they're donating so that we can process it for that value and assess the 7% administrative fee on that value. Lastly, you can ask about matching gifts. Many companies will match an employee's donation to a charity. Make sure your donors are aware that Fractured Atlas can accept these matching donations. The match will usually be at least 1-to-1, but sometimes the company will even match the donation 2-to-1 or more. Have your donors check in with their HR or matching gift departments to see what protocol is necessary to submit for a matching gift. Generally, the project will look something like this, where your donors will make a contribution to Fractured Atlas. From there, he or she will need to report that donation to his or her employer. The employer will check with Fractured Atlas usually and will confirm that we've received the donation. Then, a few months later, we'll get a check from the employer matching the original contribution. Unfortunately, it does usually take several months for the payment to come through, but it's essentially free money. Your donor is making a gift, but having double the impact of that gift. So it's attractive for them, and it's also attractive to you because, of course, then you have access to more funding. So lastly, we're going to talk really briefly about crowdfunding. Crowdfunding, for anyone who is unfamiliar, is the collective cooperation, attention, and trust by people who network and pool their money together, usually via the internet, in order to support efforts initiated by other people or organizations. That's a Wikipedia example, or definition, but really, it's a way. It's a newer method of fundraising, even though it's actually based in the way fundraising has worked forever, that uses an online community to solicit pledges. It uses word of mouth and wisdom of the crowd to generate interest in a project and to generate donations for that project. It engages donors as part of a community of donors that provides transparency on who is giving and how much is being raised. There are a lot of platforms out there, and they all have their benefits. And so it's a good idea to really think about what it is that your donors are looking for when choosing a platform. I will mention at this point that Fractured Atlas has a partnership with Indiegogo, but that partnership is winding down. So if you were thinking of running an Indiegogo campaign, your campaign would need to end by March 30th if you wanted it to be connected to Fractured Atlas. And with that, I'd like to introduce FundingWorks, which is Fractured Atlas's, sorry about that, Fractured Atlas's new fundraising software, which includes tools for crowdfunding. This software is still in development and will continue to be developed over the course of many months. But the crowdfunding tools are in place right now, and you can start using them right away. Some of the benefits of FundingWorks are that there is the 7% administrative fee, whereas a lot of other places, the fee ends up being slightly higher. Their advertised fee is usually around 5% or so. And along with that, they're going to pass along the credit card fees or payment processing fees that they incur as part of charging credit cards for their platform. Fractured Atlas, and usually that means that the fee is going to even out around 10% or maybe even as high as 12%. But Fractured Atlas's fee will be 7% across the board, and there will be no extra credit card fees that will pass along to you. Your donors can still make tax-deductible donations, and the donations will be processed by Fractured Atlas, and it integrates with your fiscal sponsorship. So you'll be able to track your donations in the same way as well as on FundingWorks, and it actually at this point is only available to fiscally sponsored projects. Down the road, it'll include more tools for our fiscally sponsored projects that will help them with their overall fundraising, not just crowdfunding. So before we open this up for questions, I wanted to just briefly introduce some of Fractured Atlas's other programs. We have an insurance program which helps you to minimize your risk. You know, a lot of contracts that you might enter into will ask for insurance, and Fractured Atlas offers a venue for you to get that. You know, it's all arts insurance policies that are created for for specific disciplines, and you may not probably won't be able to find these insurance policies anywhere else. Our goal with our insurance program is really to make it so that you're not buying something that you don't actually need. We want to make sure that you are only buying the insurance that you need for your specific work. We also have a program called Space Finder, which is an online marketplace that matches renters to spaces that might meet your unique needs. We're live in something like 14 cultural hubs across the United States, and we're expanding into Canada. So if you are looking to rent a space, whether it's a performance space or a rehearsal space, or maybe you need a space for a film shoot or a gallery or anything like that, you can look to see if Space Finder is live in the area that you are looking to rent the space, and see if you can filter based on your unique needs to make sure that you are finding a space that actually meets them. So with that, I'm going to open this up for questions, but I wanted to invite you to take all of the webinars in this series. You know, this is an introduction to fundraising, but we also offer an introduction to fiscal sponsorship for anyone who is still interested in applying, an orientation for newly approved fiscally sponsored projects, and proposals and grants for fiscally sponsored projects, as well as every once in a while we'll do some special ones, including crowdfunding and some other opportunities might come down the pipeline. So I'm going to open it up for questions. I see that a few have already come in, but feel free. We have 17 minutes, so you're welcome to keep asking questions. So the first question I see here is, what is their OP system? I'm not sure what OP system you're talking about. So if you wanted to just type in again, I will look out for that question again. Does FundingWorks work with Patreon? No, but FundingWorks does, because it integrates with your fiscal sponsorship. It also integrates with Artfully. So if you're looking for a way to track your donors and collect donations, then FundingWorks and Artfully together would be the solution that Fractured Atlas could offer. When money is donated through FundingWorks, there's the 7%. I know there's a processing fee for donations to the usual Fractured Atlas platform. Do these fees also apply to funds given to FundingWorks? Yes. When you are I think I answered that correctly. You will not incur two fees. It will always be 7% because FundingWorks is essentially just a mask for your fiscal sponsorship. It's just the platform through which your donors are giving to your fiscally sponsored project. That means that we are processing donations in exactly the same way as we do for your fiscal sponsorship, and you will only incur the 7% fee. Do you have advice on asking for donations from people who don't know you very well or at all? My advice would be to get to know those people. In fact, I would invite them out to coffee. I'd see if you have a mutual acquaintance who could maybe make an introduction for you. Perhaps that person would also be interested in grabbing coffee with you so that you have that sort of buffer in place. Um, you want to make sure that you are engaging with these people personally before making the ask. So give them opportunities to experience your work, give them opportunities to get to know you, give them opportunities to get to know your artists. You really want to make sure that you are making that personal connection with them before making the ask. Where did I say the templates are on the websites? If you're fiscally sponsored, there is a heading on your My Fiscal Sponsorship page that's called Fundraising Templates. And under that heading, you'll be able to find you'll find a template for individual appeal letters, along with a few other templates and guides that you can use to create your fundraising materials. Besides the end of the year, what are other effective times in the year to solicit funds? A lot of that has to do with how you are developing your fundraising plan and your fundraising strategy. Um, I can tell you that a really bad month to run some sort of campaign or do a major ask is August. A lot of people are on vacation in August, and I mean, generally July is kind of the same. Those are the slower months. So you want to make sure that your communication and your fundraising plan are timely with what you're actually trying to fundraise for. And that's going to be the best time of year to ask for funds. So it's not so much about the time of year, but the relationship to the work that you're creating that's going to make for the most effective communication. But again, people are more likely to stay active and engaged not during the summer months, because that's when they're trying to relax and rejuvenate, and they may not be online as much, or they might not be going to as many events, but they're staying more active in those things during the school year, for lack of a better way of describing it. Oh, the operating system. Okay, so the question from before was what operating system of the users who could not see her? Oh, the thank you for offering a solution to the for people who were having a hard time viewing the slides. If it could be the operating system that you're using to actually view, or it could even be the browser that you were using to view the slides. Thank you for offering that. So the next question is, will there be a recording of this or a PDF? There will be a recording of this. I have been recording it since the beginning, so I will be able to put it up onto YouTube and send you a link. Oh, great. So it's great to see that you got the video to work. Yes, the audio along with the video will be available after tonight. Does it make sense to run a campaign with Seed and Spark and Funding Works, or is it better to stick to one? Why? Um, So that's a really good question. And this is broadly about running two campaigns at the same time. You don't want to confuse your donors. So if you have two distinctive places to donate, your donors might think, what's the difference? Why should I choose one or the other? And it ends up making more work for you in the end and more work for your donors. If there's any chance that your donors could be confused about the process, that means they're going to be less likely to give. So I would suggest only using one platform at a time. Now, it could be that Seed and Spark is what makes more sense for you, and that's fine, especially since they have that component, that distribution component. If that's what makes more sense for you and you think your donors would respond to that, then absolutely go with Seed and Spark. But if your donors care a little bit more about the tax deduction, and that's the messaging that you want to give them, then probably Funding Works is the better solution. And this is the same as if you wanted to run a campaign on Funding Works, or you want and Indiegogo, or if you wanted to run one on Kickstarter and Indiegogo. The thing to remember with crowdfunding is that you are going to be driving most of that traffic to the campaign page. So adding that extra layer of work is going to make it harder on you and less likely for your donors to contribute, but also adds more confusion. It's not necessarily targeting two separate audiences because your audience is actually the same. I hope that helps to answer your question. Do I have any suggestions for projects first getting started that are at the very beginnings of building their donor database? For example, an event to introduce your project to a large group of people at once, recommendations on how to invite. Um, this is going to depend sort of on what you're doing. There are some strategies that you can use where you maybe build a social media presence first and you invite everybody that you know to like your page. And that way you are building an audience based on your immediate network. And that is generally where you're going to want to start, is your immediate network, and then expand to outer networks after that. But the way you reach that immediate network is sort of dependent on who they are and what it is that you're doing. Yes, if an event is going to be effective in introducing your project to a large group of people, sort of like a launch party or something like that, then absolutely go that route. Though events can be very expensive. Um, if you think that writing a letter to everybody you know, or writing an email introducing your project to everybody you know is going to be more effective, then absolutely go that route instead. Maybe you need to make a few calls. Maybe you need to build a team of people so that they can start reaching out to their immediate networks. And in general, I would say that's a good idea, is building a team who can help you access their networks. These are all strategies that you can use, but if you are interested in talking more about this, I would suggest emailing us at support@fracturedatlas.org, and somebody could set up a call with you to talk about your specific needs and your specific strategies. Okay, so the next question is, if I receive donations through Fractured Atlas, will I get a tax form, and when would I expect that? So this is sort of getting into the basics of fiscal sponsorship, which isn't really part of this webinar, but I'll go ahead and answer it. So if any other questions about the application or about the basics of fiscal sponsorship come up, I'd suggest giving us a call or emailing us. Um, but this is pretty sort of relevant since it has to do with donations. So donations are not considered tax deductible or not considered taxable income for you until we release them to you for your business expenses. So the process will be that Fractured Atlas receives the donation, you request the funds when you need them, and we release them to you. And at that point, they become taxable income to you because they are a grant. If you are any entity other than a corporation and you have released at least $600 in the tax year or in the calendar year, then we will issue you a 1099. We'll issue a 1099 to the entity we have on file for your fiscal sponsorship. So yes, we will issue you a tax form, and it will come at the end of the tax year / the beginning of the following tax year. We are required by law to send out those 1099s by the end of January, so you should be receiving them for the prior tax year in February or so. This next question is, I've never created a crowdfunding campaign. Is creating one and launching it before March 30th a reasonable attempt? Trust has already been developed with regards to Indiegogo. Yeah, if you already have an audience in place and you think that you can create a campaign and run it, then 30 days or so is a pretty ideal time frame for a crowdfunding campaign. So because we do have that relationship or that partnership with Indiegogo, your donors will still be able to make tax deductible contributions and they will still come through your fiscal sponsorship. If you are interested in doing this, you should go to your My Fiscal Sponsorship page, and under the Accessorize heading, there is a link for Indiegogo. Once you click on that and click through the prompts, you'll be able to create a campaign connected to Fractured Atlas. But if you have any question about whether or not it was connected effectively or successfully, go ahead and send us an email and we'll be happy to check in on it for you. What are your thoughts on sending ask letters to people whose address you have because they purchased online tickets to your events? I think that's fairly standard, but I'm not sure. It is pretty standard for you to tap into your existing audience. And by audience, I mean, patrons, people who have purchased tickets to your events because they have demonstrated an interest in your work. I think it's absolutely fine to do that. Um, you might want to think about how you're communicating with them, and if a personal ask is going to be more effective than maybe an e-blast or any other sort of ask letter. But I think tapping into your audience, your existing audience, is a good strategy in order to reach people who are already interested in your work. I would suggest this is especially possible, I guess, if you have asked them if they are okay with opting into communications from you, because that means that they have said right up front, I am okay with you contacting me, and that would give you the green light to send them an ask letter. So this next question is, I have sent about 15 ask letters already with only 2 responses or donors. When is a good follow-up time period? That'll really depend on the person who you're contacting or who you're asking. Um, if it's been a month, then probably you can follow up with them now. If it's been if you were lucky enough to get those 2 responses in the first week, then maybe it's a good idea to wait another week or so. But you also want to think about why people may not be responding. Is it because they're on vacation? Is it because they have been really crazy at work? You know, it, think about what you know about those people and how that might translate into their timeline for being receptive for a repetitive communication. Does a donation of a tangible good incur an administrative fee? Yes, we still charge the 7% administrative fee on based on the value of the non-cash donation. Your fund balance will either need to be high enough to cover that fee, or we will ask for you to authorize us to charge your credit card when you go to report that donation. And will I send a link for the next session? I can. I can certainly send a link for the next webinar when I send the email for the recording of this webinar. Could we have the PowerPoint? I can certainly send you the slides for this PowerPoint, though as you saw, most of them were images, so they may not be super effective or super helpful in your notes. But if they help to jog your memory, then absolutely. On the FundingWorks crowdfunding platform, is there a time limit on that, like with Indiegogo? Um, there is not necessarily a time limit, though the most effective campaigns tend to be 30 to 45 days. So we're going to advise you based on the knowledge that we have of what makes a crowdfunding campaign effective. It's not really a good idea to have a campaign longer than 90 days because of momentum. And we can talk a little bit more about that. So if you're interested in running a campaign that's longer than 45 days, we'll be happy to talk to you about that on a one-on-one basis. So the question, this is a follow-up to the Patreon question from before. So it might not be a good idea to have a Patreon site and a Fractured Atlas site. Did you mean that? Usually it is not a good idea to have more than one call to action for your donors. You don't want to have more than one place to donate. And you want to make sure that you are effectively communicating why you choose the specific services or tools that you're using. It's not that it's a bad idea to have a Patreon site and Fractured Atlas and use Fractured Atlas, but you really want to make sure that you know what the differences are and if you actually need to pay for both, frankly. And if you do use both, how you're going to communicate that to your donors. Is it tacky to send a gift with an ask letter, like a coffee cup with your project's logo? I would strongly advise that you look at the cost of that before you send an ask letter because that could be very expensive. If you're sending a sticker to everybody, I think that is a great idea because that right up front is giving something that is sort of negligible in value and doesn't affect the donation amount at all, but also that it won't break and it doesn't take up too much space and it is a really quick way for them to advertise that they support your work, rather than a coffee cup, which they'll probably either keep on their desk at work or keep in a cupboard in their house. So think about the different types of gifts that you can ask that won't break the bank for you. So we're at 8:01 and we have one question left. I'm going to go ahead and answer that question. If anybody needs to sign off, I want to thank you now for coming, for joining us tonight. I hope this was helpful, and I will be in touch in the next couple of days with the recording of the presentation. So the last question here we have is, we are applying to grants and there is a line asking for the fiscal sponsor name and tax ID number. Do we put Fractured Atlas? If so, where do we get the number? This is Fractured Atlas needs to review every single grant application that you submit. So you should email us the application and we will review it before giving you instructions for how to include the fiscal sponsor and our tax ID number. Go ahead and email support@fracturedatlas.org with those materials, as well as a deadline for the grant and your guidelines or the guidelines for the grant so that we can review it for you. Great. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming tonight. I hope this was helpful again, and I hope you have I hope you make really stellar fundraising campaigns and fundraising plans, and Fractured Atlas is here to help you. So I look forward to speaking with you about them in the future. Thanks. Have a great night.